Muy bien, muy bien. Me acaban de indicar en este momento que ya está todo bien, ya se resolvió, así que vamos a empezar. Disculpe, doctora Holly, por la demora, a veces los temas técnicos que ya se solucionaron. Muy bien, entonces, bueno, con todos y todas ustedes tenemos el agrado de dar la bienvenida a la doctora Holly Wilcox, doctora en filosofía. Ella es directora y fundadora del Centro para la Prevención del Suicidio de la Universidad Johns Hopkins. La doctora Holly Wilcox es catedrática del Departamento de Salud Mental de la Escuela de Salud Pública Bloomberg de la Universidad Johns Hopkins, con nombramientos conjuntos en el Departamento de Política y Gestión de la Salud, así como en las facultades de Medicina y Educación de la misma universidad. La doctora Holly utiliza la investigación para impulsar enfoques de salud pública para la prevención del suicidio, incluyendo políticas, intervención temprana y enfoques de atención integral. Ella es presidenta, además, de la Academia Internacional de Investigación sobre el Suicidio, miembro de la Junta Nacional y del Consejo Científico de la Fundación Americana para la Prevención del Suicidio y consultora en prevención del suicidio para la Organización Mundial de la Salud. Es miembro, además, del profesorado afiliado de la Iniciativa Americana de Salud Bloomberg. La doctora Wilcox preside también la Comisión de Prevención del Suicidio de Maryland del gobierno Whitmore. Forma parte del equipo de revisión de muertes por suicidio del mismo lugar y es investigadora afiliada del Centro de Excelencia en Investigación para la Prevención del Suicidio del Instituto Black Dog en Australia. Muchísimas gracias, doctora Holly Wilcox. Eh, Le damos la palabra para que pueda iniciar su presentación.
Thank you so much, Carolina. I appreciate that kind introduction. And thank you, everyone, for having me. I apologize for speaking in English. My Spanish is not good enough to do this presentation. So thank you for your patience in advance. So I wanted to talk with you all a little bit about the sensitive period of the transition to college and how, we think of different other sensitive periods in life, retirement for some people, like leaving one's profession and retiring is a sensitive period, or starting school in kindergarten or first grade is another sensitive period, or um, going to high school, to a new school with, different expectations. And so this transition to college is an interesting one. It's associated with some significant stressors for some young people, depending on where they go. It could be based on financial stress, sometimes tuition, depending on which college they go to, is very expensive. Leaving one's family if they leave the home and they go away to college, adapting to new expectations and a new environment. And it's also somewhat of the peak age of the onset of major mental illnesses. So bipolar disorder, psychosis sometimes start in young adulthood. And so it is really an age where they have so much going on. We also know that mental illness and depression, substance abuse are associated with worse academic outcomes and dropping out of college. And so these are factors that, are on our radar when we interface with young people. Today, I wanted to present some international data. And these are not my data. I was not part of this study, but I think these are the best data that we have globally, looking at suicide in college students. The World Mental Health Survey is a survey that was done in many countries to get the incidence and prevalence of mental disorders across many, many countries in the world. And that study or project had an initiative that focused on college students, and that's a subset of the larger study. And so in this study, what they did is they did web-based surveys of almost 14,000 first-year college students. in 19 colleges in 8 countries. And the study has since expanded to even more countries. So what they did is they looked at lifetime and 12 months prevalence of suicidal thoughts and behaviors, as well as age of onset and persistence of suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And they used the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, which is the gold standard tool that's used in the field. They also looked at socio-demographic characteristics like gender, age, parental education level, marital status of parents, urbanicity, religious background, sexual orientation. They also looked at a host of mental disorders and also college-related correlates like academic ranking in high school, secondary school, reason to go to college, whether it was their choice versus not their own choice, that was their family's choice, living situation, whether they needed to work while they were in college. And the response rate in this study across these countries was about 45%. And so they used weighting to try to make implications on a larger scale for those participants that were in this study. So I'm going to talk about the results from this first study by Philippe Moutier, and he is from Spain, and he published one of the papers, one of the landmark papers from the study. And what they found in the study is when they looked at lifetime suicidal ideation, they found that nearly 1 in 3 students, or about 33%, had lifetime ideation that were in the study. 17.5 had a lifetime suicide plan, and 4.3% had a lifetime suicide attempt. So you can see what that translates to: 1 in 3, 1 in 6, 1 in 23. And when they looked at the past 12 months, they found that about 17% had ideation in the past year at the transition to college period. Almost 9% had a plan for suicide, and 1% made an attempt. And here you can see there's quite a bit of variation across the countries. Australia had the highest rate of suicidal 12-month suicidal ideation, and Belgium had the smallest. But you can see overall what the rate was about 17.2%. And what they did in this study, which I think is really interesting, that the group that ran this study, it's sort of based out of Ron Kessler's group at Harvard University. And he was the originator of the World Mental Health Surveys to try to get global incidence and prevalence data, and also of this study, sort of the main person behind it. And what they like to do is they like to look at transitions. So the transition from ideation, thoughts of suicide, to plan, and from plan to attempt. So they looked at who made that transition from no ideation to ideation, and then from those who ideated, how many then went on to make a plan, and that was 53%. And of those who made a plan, how many went on to make an attempt? And so they found that was 22%. So these are fairly substantial numbers in my estimation. When they looked at when the first occurrence of suicide ideation happened, they found that in 75%, all of suicidal thoughts and behaviors happened before age 16. And the median onset of first thoughts of suicide was age 14. They also looked at which student groups were most affected by suicidal thoughts and behaviors, and they found that it was, of no surprise, the non-heterosexual students, or LGBTQ plus students, were much more likely to report suicidal ideation and behaviors. And they were also more likely to transition from thoughts to plan to attempt. And that was one of the largest risk factors in their data set. I wanted to also talk about a couple of their other papers, because they published quite a lot from this study. There was one of the investigators, Randy Auerbach, what he looked at was the prevalence of mental disorders among the first year college students. And here you can see the lifetime prevalence and the 12-month prevalence, with major depression and anxiety being the most prevalent, followed by substance abuse, which I'm sure is not a surprise. Then what he also did is they looked at different subtypes of students that experience suicidal thoughts and behaviors, and they found that the highest risk subgroup, which represented under 2% of students, had a lot of mental health burden. So they had four or plus more mental disorders, including mania and hypomania, and that represented about 15% of those who had an attempt in the past 12 months. So this is a high risk group. And these are students who in the past may have not been able to attend college, but because of the development of different treatments and supports, these students are now able to attend college. Yeah. And then there's some other subgroups here. Subgroup C had a lot of internalizing and externalizing comorbidity, and they made an attempt at about almost under 3%. And then another group that had mostly all internalizing. So they had mixed mood and anxiety symptoms. And then another subset of students that only had one single psychiatric disorder. So they looked at this comorbidity and the patterns of comorbidity in the students that had suicidality. Another thing that they outlined in the study that was fascinating is the treatment gap. They would look to see how many students were able to get treatment for their mental health and suicidality. And so they found that the lifetime is the darker shade here. About 36% got treatment for mental disorder. 36 also percent got mental health help for suicidal thoughts and behavior. And then of the more severe cases, about 60% got some type of help. So there certainly is a major gap in burden and getting help and treatment for psychiatric issues and suicidality. And students were asked why they didn't seek help if they needed it. And only about 25% would definitely seek treatment for a future emotional problem. And the reasons why they reported they didn't get help is they prefer to handle it alone. They would prefer to talk to family and friends. They didn't think it was that serious. They were too embarrassed to seek help, and cost and financial barriers to getting help. So this study has really grown even more. And as of 2025, it's in 18 countries now. They've expanded. And with the new findings, about 65% screen positive for lifetime mental disorder, which is even higher, in this post-pandemic period than the 35% in the original wave. And you can see the proportion with lifetime comorbidity, and they found different clusters of mental disorders hanging together, and those clusters being associated with suicide risk. And they found that those students who are at increased risk had both internalizing and externalizing disorder, and they were the highest risk group. So these are the countries where this initiative is taking place. And so it's something to watch. And then just sort of the research in some numbers, just to summarize again, the prevalence of suicide ideation in college students from the study was almost 33%. 15% had a 12-month attempt. 75% had the onset before age 16. The LGBTQ students were more affected by suicidal thoughts and behavior. And of the students with suicidal thoughts and behaviors, 75% received no 12-month treatment in the past 12 months. And many of the students prefer to handle their concerns on their own, and that was the top barrier. And this next paper is also an interesting, this study really looked at adversity in childhood and how that childhood adversity is related to suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And so what they did is they looked at all different types of adversities. They looked at emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, being victimized by a bully, and dating violence. And they did a bunch of data analysis with these, looking at the number of adversities, the type of adversity, severity, and combinations. And this is sort of the main finding. And what this PARP means, it's the risk proportion. It means the proportion of the total cases due to the risk factor. So the proportion of those people with suicidal ideation that can be attributed to adverse experiences. So that's pretty substantial. And what they did is they found that with the increasing number of adversities, their risk for lifetime suicidal behavior was higher. And then they looked at the number of adversities and the transition from ideation to plan, and they found that that was greater in those that had more childhood adverse experiences. When they looked specifically at those people who made a plan from transitioning to plan to attempt, so they actually are taking action to end their life, they found that sexual abuse was the most strongly associated, and also dating violence. So this sort of physical violence was more closely associated with the transition to making an attempt, being a victim of violence. And down here, bullying victimization was really strongly associated with the transition from having thoughts of suicide to taking action. So they're looking sort of at these trajectories by the abuse adverse experience history. So these findings suggest that 1 out of 3 college students has experience with suicidal ideation at least once in their lifetime, and around 4 to 5% attempted suicide. Sexual minority groups are at elevated risk. And much of these suicide episodes happen before they entered college. And these are associated with problems in college, as well as college dropout. So more than 60% of suicidal ideation among college students was associated with adverse childhood experiences. And the frequency and types of adverse childhood experience best explains the transition. So what can we do about this? The fact that so many students enter college with mental health concerns and develop that over the first year is a major concern. And the JED Foundation is one group that I'm familiar with that has been really working on this issue and taking a holistic approach. This is their model, and it involves developing life skills, promoting social connectedness, identifying students at risk, increasing help-seeking behavior, and so forth. So it's a comprehensive approach that they advocate for, that colleges and universities are rolling out for students. And so there are these 7 domains. It's really considered a public health approach because it really takes a focus on promoting resilience and protective factors like life skills and social connectedness. It also encourages early intervention. And this was adapted from a very famous study that was done in the US Air Force where the suicide rates were really increasing. And they did an entire system-wide approach to reduce rates of suicide. And by doing that, they took a holistic and very coordinated approach to this issue. Rather than just doing one thing, they were trying to implement all 7. And that's what the JED Foundation recommends, is to have evidence-based practices that are generated in each of these. The thing that's really hard is there are not a lot of great data on initiatives that are more in the developing life skills and promoting social connectedness areas. These are really challenging. There's some really there's emerging research on social prescribing. With this kind of culture of loneliness that many people are in after the pandemic, this issue of, giving them a little push to get out and socialize. And so a primary care doctor can actually write a prescription. You should be doing these activities in the community and getting out of the house and trying to be social and going bowling and going to concerts and going for walks and just getting them out of their routine that may be challenging for them, and the whole idea of being around other individuals. These studies, they're randomized trials on social prescribing. I don't think any of them have results yet, but I'm really excited to see how that goes because I think it's an interesting concept. So you may be wondering what we did, and we at Johns Hopkins, we did all these except for the green. Like we have all of these in place. And so one of the things that we really focused on, and I am just gonna go for it. Oh, sorry. One of the things we really focused on was these third-party platforms. One was eBridge, which we didn't use. The other one I'm going to talk about today is the interactive screening program. And these are platforms that are intended for helping college students, and you can contract with them to get support for your campus. And then all these trainings, like we do these at Hopkins. We have trainings for the faculty, for the staff, for the students. They're all free. And so the psychological first aid is a little longer. It's a few days long, and the QPR can be done in like 1 or 2 hours. So depending on what you need, they're all available for folks on our campus. And these are gatekeeper training, so training for people who come into somebody at risk so they'll know what to do. And then there are general awareness activities like different campus walks to spread awareness about suicide prevention and other programs. But I'm going to talk about this interactive screening program because the one thing we were noticing at our setting was we had these great mental health services and it didn't seem like they were utilized to the extent that they should be. So we heard about the interactive screening program, which was developed by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And it's been around for almost 25 years. And the idea is that it aims to break down barriers to mental health support. And it's been used by over 200 colleges to date. I believe this is in Spanish. It can be done in Spanish. So, and what happens is for each university, they're trained up, they pay for their own cloud where the data is stored. And so it's very inexpensive. I think it was under $5,000 for us. So when we signed up, the training was provided to a counselor who was in our health center, our student health center. And then we got our cloud set up where all the data would be stored. And we had our individual HIPAA protected cloud. And then what we did is we sent out questionnaires, and they're stress and depression questionnaires. So we send them out to groups of students, the whole 26,000 students at Johns Hopkins. We send it out and we do it gradually. We do it like school by school by school. So engineering maybe goes first, and then arts and sciences goes next, and then public health goes next, and then nursing goes next, and then medical school. We have like an order where we send out the emails to all the students, and the faculty is informed. And then the students, when they get the email asking them if they'd like to take a depression and stress questionnaire, they can either ignore it or they can take it. And so it is anonymous when they fill out the questionnaire. And then it's scored. They receive a personalized response where their questionnaire is scored, and they are told how they scored on the questionnaire, whether there's more substance abuse or other problems that were indicated on their screener that they should address. And then they have the option to private chat with a clinician. And this is somebody in our health center, and that person's trained on how to do this. And then the students are still anonymous, and they can write and say, I had a stressful event. I, had a sexual assault, or this happened or this happened. And the approach from the counselor is very individualistic and helping the person get the support they need. And so this can go out like we do with to all 26,000 students, or it can just go to specific student groups. So it can be customized. The questionnaire can be changed so that it just addresses the questions that are most of interest to you. And so usually about 1% to 22% of students complete the screen. For us, it's about under 3% of our students complete it. Some of the people who complete it are not at risk, but others are. And it's anonymous, which makes it nice. Some of our students are like wanting to get a security clearance, or they're concerned about stigma, or they're concerned about somebody finding out that they're struggling, and they don't want that. And so the nice thing about this is it's anonymous. And that's why I think that is a value of this. So we have the data set from the study. We're doing an evaluation of it. And in the data set, 60 colleges agreed to provide their data of over 60,000 students. And we have about a decade and a half of data, and there's surveys, but we also have the conversations, the chats between the clinician and the students. So we're using natural language processing tools and AI to code those data. But what we found by looking at the data in the whole 60 colleges, females were more likely to complete the screen. Students who are depressed, they had a PHQ score of 10 or higher, were more likely to complete the screen, which is great because it's telling us those are the students we want. We want the students who are struggling, because that way we can try to support them. And then when we looked by these other characteristics, we found that the older students were more likely, the graduate students, let's say, medical students, graduate students, paraprofessional students were more likely to complete this and connect to care. The students who were genderqueer, LGBTQ genderqueer, were less likely to connect to care as a result after taking this survey. And the white students were more likely to connect to care. The Latina students were less likely, and the other, which is a combined group. And then we also looked at by symptoms, and what we found is that those students that were struggling with self-harm, suicidal ideation attempt, and depression were more likely. And we're also finding a lot of students who are not in any mental health care. And so the majority, a good proportion of those who are already not in care were getting connected to care after they took this screener and got help. And so that's really what it's all about. And one thing we did is we analyzed the conversations between the students. We anonymized all the data, and we looked at the counselor and student conversations, and we looked at the stressors that they were reporting in this. And there were a list of 17 stressors. And for us in the United States, as you all know, there are many societal events, and there are, I guess, in the whole world, but lots of interesting stressors that are happening for us now in the United States. And here you can see academic stressors were the most prevalent: mental health, relationship issues, family dynamics, social problems, financial, career decisions, stress. And this is at 60 different colleges, and some of them are private, some of them are public. They're all over the United States. And so, really, kind of just to summarize who connects to care, there are certain demographic groups who are more likely to use the screener, and that was female students and students who were over 25 years old, and mostly white students, and also students with mental health problems and were not connected to care already. So that's our target group. That's who we want to get. Instead of waiting passively for them to walk through the door of our clinic, the idea of using the screener is to find them. It's case finding, finding the young people we need and trying to get them into us so that we can provide services. They may not want to come into the Johns Hopkins Clinic, and if they don't, that's okay. We can find service providers for them in the community. And so we also went and looked at the stressors, and they were very much focused in the academic, mental health, and relationship space. And students reporting more stressors, and certain types of stressors were more likely to connect to care. And we're also looking at the empathy of the therapist because we have all the texts. So we're looking at the empathy that the therapist, because it's all done through chat, so it's hard to be empathetic. And what we found were there were certain types of empathy that were associated with students connecting to care, and others that weren't, that were negatively associated. And so it's really interesting to understand how you can engage a student really quickly and try to get them activated into their own care. And if you say the wrong thing, you could miss your chance. And lastly, there's one other intervention that we've been using because, like I said, there's a lot of issues with our students and not wanting to have somebody see them walking into the mental health clinic and not wanting the stigma and all that and not wanting to get care and being too busy and having a lot of barriers. So we have anonymous web-based therapy available for all of our students through SilverCloud. And so that's available, and that was available over the pandemic for students to just use that. If they don't want traditional therapy, if they're not available between 9 to 5 when the clinic's open, they can do this. It's self-paced. They do this on their own online, and they can maintain their anonymity with this approach. So we will be looking at those data soon. I just wanted to mention to you all that there's a great conference that's coming up that will be in Costa Rica, and it will be happening in November of this year. So many of you who are interested in suicide prevention may want to consider possibly attending this conference, and workshop opportunities are available until July 21st if any of you would like to pursue that. So I just wanted to mention that as a resource, and I just wanted to thank our team and the AFSP and the Healthy Minds Survey folks in the United States. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Holly. Excelente tu presentación. Probablemente